Thank you, sir, for taking the time out. I'm Rohan from Hindustan Times. Uh, I'm just curious, have you seen 1917 yet?
No, unfortunately, I've been wanting to see it. In fact, I had the opportunity of seeing it ages ago before it released in India. But one of the problems of when you're making your own films is that you just don't get to see other films. But that's definitely on my list.
I
will
would
hear
strongly
it.
recommend an IMAX.
Yes,
Changes the
yes.
game. The reason I bring up 1917 is because there was a very interesting idea. I mean, a lot has been said about the one shot, the technical achievements of the film, but then there's a very cool idea in the film. So, two soldiers are sent on a mission, but the mission isn't to harm anyone, it's to save them. The mission isn't to start a fight, but it's to stop the fight. So I thought that was a very cool idea, and it's a very unique way of looking at a nationalistic story. And obviously, in our country, we have a very different idea about that. Now, I'm curious, when you started writing the show, and I know that you've been working on it for years and years and years, the idea has been changing in those years. Now, how conscious were you now to be very strong with your point of view and not to kind of fall into the same traps as others, perhaps, or not be swayed?
So, I've always taken the politics of my films very, very seriously. And I've often said that, the politics of a film is one of the most strong elements of a film. I mean, I can forgive a shoddy screenplay, bad acting, bad shot taking, but I can never forgive bad politics of a film. So, I would like to believe that there's something that drew me to the Azad-Hind Fauj, which was true about its ethos and its spirit at that point in time when I was drawn to it, and that remains true today also. So I will never make it because there's something popular right now and we should sort of fit in with the narrative. I mean, today I think the whole distinction between patriotism and nationalism is all blurred. I think Azad-Hind Fauj is about true patriots, and that's what I wanted to show. And therefore, I feel that the ethos or the spirit of the story that I wrote 20 years ago is the same as the ethos today. It definitely has not been, in any way tried to bring in what might be the popular narrative of the day.
But how do you avoid doing that? Because you first need to be aware of this is what's happening, and but this is not what I believe in.
I think you're aware when if you are in touch with your ideology and you're in touch with what you believe in, then it's not very difficult at all, because then there's only one filter it has to pass, and that's your filter. You have to see something and say, is this making sense to me? Is this seeming like not sensationalism to me, or not necessarily like pushing a point forward to me? Then I'll go ahead with it. So I think in that sense, it's not a struggle. It's easy because it has to come organically from you. It's only when you try and construct it to pander to other interests is when it becomes difficult, because then you're at sea, because you don't know anybody else as well as you know yourself. Yeah. So for a filmmaker, I've often said the only test that you have to pass is for yourself as far as the politics of a film is concerned.
I was asking this to the actors as well. I was asking them, since they aren't essentially as in control of the story as you are, because you've written it, you've been with the story for so long, how important is the messaging of a story to you? Because essentially people can appreciate, like you said, people can appreciate the technical aspects of the story, they can appreciate the filmmaking, but if they don't appreciate the message of it, then that's not cool, right? Because you have to be very clear with what you want to tell the audience. What do you want to tell the audience with this show, particularly in relation to themes of national pride, things like that? What is the message that you want to send?
So, I've often had problems when somebody asks me what is my message, because I feel for a filmmaker to say that I'm giving a message is a little pompous a statement, because
But you don't want people to take away the wrong thing.
Absolutely no. So at the end of a film, there will always be things that people will take away. Yeah. But that has to be something that is hidden in the layers beneath. You can never make a film that is about a message. If you go about constructing a film with a message in mind, I think you can go wrong. Message always comes from a film. It could be a very simple story, but if you say it through the prism of whatever your views are on society, on politics, the message will always be there, and the message always has to be in the layers beneath. So for me, yes, what is compelling for me was to tell the story of an army, that tell the story of 55,000 men and women who went into battle between 1942 to 1945, and yet nobody knows anything about them. So for me, the main motive was to tell the story of this army and let India at least get to know what they did. Then they can obviously sit in judgment about what they did was right or wrong. Did they contribute to the freedom of India? Did they not contribute to the freedom of India? Was it right to align with the Japanese? Was it wrong to align with them? All these things can be debated after first you get to know what this army did in those 3 years. As of now, the problem is that the audiences do not know anything about what the Azad Hind Fauj did from 1942 to 1945. And once they get to know, then the questions arise. Then why was not a single soldier of this army ever taken into the free independent army? Why was it that this is an army that fought for the independence of India? 27,000 laid their lives down for the independence of India. But when India finally became independent, not one soldier of this army was ever taken back into the free independent army. So all these are things that, of course, the audience will think about, they will ask questions about. And I've often said that a film is such a dynamic character, it's a dynamic creature that everybody will not take away that one message from it. Everybody will take away what they perceive of the film through their prism and their conditioning and their views and their ideologies. So that's what makes a film, I think, interesting, that everybody picks up pieces that like they can resonate with, that they can identify with, and walk out with that.
How concerned were you with being historically accurate? Now, of course, you have to take some liberties, and a lot has been condensed. How important was it for you to be historically accurate, especially now when history is like
being distorted. No, it was very important to be true to the history in terms of the events that took place, in terms of the chronology of events. All that is very important. Yes, but ultimately it's a story of characters, human characters that you create in the foreground of that entire. The backdrop is all true, all historical, all genuine, but in the foreground is a human story, and that is what is important. So in the foreground, the principal 4 or 5 characters that we've created, I've combined sometimes certain characters. I've taken elements. See, again, it's not a story about leaders and not a story about historically very known people. It's a story of foot soldiers. It's for the first time that you get to know the story of the Azad Hind Fauj through the eyes of the foot soldiers of that army. So therefore, for me, I took, all the stories that I'd heard about this happened with that person, this happened that. Sometimes I've taken those elements and put them into one character.
Yeah.
And put them, so for me, the character of Maya is a combination of Lakshmi Sehgal. She's a combination of second in command Janki Thevar. She's a combination of some other, women who had joined Rani Jhansi Regiment. Captain Sodhi is a combination of Colonel Gurbakht Singh Dhillon, Shahnawaz Khan, Prem Kumar Sehgal. Elements of that, the love story of Prem Kumar Sehgal and Captain Lakshmi Sehgal, elements of that I've taken. So it's essentially things that happened with people in the Azad Hind Fauj, and then those have been put together in a few principal characters in the foreground.
You spoke about it being a story about the foot soldiers essentially and not leaders per se. Half the story is set in a different time period, set in a relatively modern time, and it focuses on these student protesters, right? I mean, obviously you couldn't have predicted what's going to happen, but then how do you feel about that? And do you think it's kind of serendipitous that it's...
It is, but this always happens with history. I've always said history always remains relevant. So when I wrote this story 20 years ago, and I would read parts of it and say, hey, this sounds so relevant today for what's happening in the country. And now 20 years later, I'm reading parts, some other parts are now seeming so relevant to what's happening. So I think that is something about history, that something will always be relevant no matter what time you make it. If I'd made this 10 years ago, there'd be parts of that series which would be relevant. If I'm making it today, parts of it are very relevant, as you're saying, the student protest. 10 years later, something else would have been relevant.
People are, essentially, they do the same things, right? People are people. I mean, in the same situation.
History always repeats itself.
Yeah, so at some point, maybe 20 years later, the show will still be relevant.
Yes.
Yeah. I mean, I was also fascinated by your characterization of Netaji Bose. He's not a character in the show, but he's in the background.
Yeah. There are more references to him, because I felt that enough work has been done on Netaji, but nothing has been done on the army. So my attempt was like, if the moment you bring in Netaji as a central character, then he's such a compelling and powerful figure that then you have to go along with him.
Also controversial.
No, it's not about controversy. Even if I had stuck to what has been documented, the thing is, he is a very, very powerful character. So if you go with him, then again you go away from the story of the foot soldiers. So my attempt was, no, I want to stay with the story of the foot soldiers, but no story of Azad Fauj is complete without a reference to Netaji, because I mean, he was such a large influence on the army. I mean, these are the men and women who gave him the title of Netaji. So therefore, the attempt was to stay away from the personality of Netaji and concentrate more on the individual stories of the soldiers.
I also want to ask you, Sunny was telling me that you started, not you, but he started work on the show in 2017. And a lot has changed since then in terms of the streaming industry, right? And from what we've heard, the show is one of the biggest shows that have ever been put together on streaming. Do you think the Indian industry, is there budget-wise to kind of match up with the international shows? For example, Band of Brothers, all those years ago it came, and it was kind of amazing for television at that point. And I'm just curious to know what you think about us as an industry kind of reaching there. Can we match up to them?
So, I mean, in terms of budgets, of course, as of now, the Indian industry is nowhere close to the budgets that the international shows have. Yes, The Forgotten Army is definitely probably one of the biggest ever mounted in the sort of Indian shows in the streaming platforms, but will definitely not be close to the kind of budgets that international series get. I mean, but ultimately it's a question of you continue making it, and as you get more sort of acceptance, maybe because this is truly a global platform, you're being watched in 200 countries, and if one of our stories finds a resonance across the world, then maybe the next time you make it, you will get even bigger budgets to be able to match up to the budgets that the Western producers get.
Cool. I think that's my time. All the best, sir.
Thank you so much.
All the best
Thanks
for your
a lot.
next film.
Thank you.
Thank you for
Thanks a
talking.
lot.